Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here, got another Master Duel video for you. It's time to do another tier list. Now that we have the latest selection pack out, I want to talk about where the meta's at and where I think some of the most popular and or best decks of the current format are at. As always, we're going to be ranking them in tiers 1, 2, and 3, as well as Rogue. And as always, I feel the need to point out that I'm only ranking 20 decks for time's sake. There are so many decks that could go into the Rogue tier, and decks that are in the Rogue tier I think are not bad, by the way. I think these are more than capable of reaching Master 1 or, topping a tournament. It just sometimes might require a more dedicated or skilled pilot, but make no mistake, I think all 20 of these decks and decks that are not featured here are good and competitive and able to do well. But again, for time's sake, I can only cover so many, so... let's not waste any more time and dive right on into it. We're going to start here with Kashira. And actually, I want to use this opportunity to talk a little bit. I'm kind of going to talk about two decks at the same time here, Kashira and Regenesis, because Regenesis is often played in Kashira and vice versa. This is because Regenesis, of course, cares about monsters with 2500 attack, and Kashira Unicorn, the primary starter of Kashira, does have 2500 attack. That said, I think these decks are both pretty firmly rogue. And I don't necessarily think that builds that feature Regenesis, I mean, they might have a slight edge over ones that don't. But the thing is, like, the way that Regenesis Kashira plays in TCG is a lot different than it's going to play in Master Duel. Because in TCG, Kashira has 3 Unicorn, 3 Fenrir, and 0 Arise Heart, whereas we have 1 Fenrir, 2 Unicorn, and 3 Arise Heart. And that does make the TCG style of Regenesis Kashira definitely much weaker, for sure. Not that even there it was really that good of a deck. I mean, it was still rogue playable for sure, but definitely relied on the back of a lot of back rows, Floodgate type cards in order to really perform. So I'm going to put both these here in Rogue, both the new Regenesis archetype as well as Kashira, with or without Regenesis. Blue Eyes, I'm going to put it in tier 2. Does actually still remain one of the best decks of the format. I would argue Blue Eyes is even the 3rd best deck of the format, based on win rate and statistics like that I've seen on Untapped alone. Something we're going to talk about here later in the video once we get to Malice is whether or not we're in a tier 0 format. But I think either way, with Blue Eyes, the 3rd best deck of the format, being put in tier 2, definitely demonstrates a notable power gap between the best of the best and the rest of the best. So, but Blue Eyes is still quite good. If you're just a Blue Eyes fan, or if you're like somebody who plays more casually / on a budget, and well, I mean, not that I really pay for stuff anyway, but you know what I mean. If you don't play as much and you're kind of worried that like your Blue Eyes deck can't keep up, I wouldn't be worried. I think Blue Eyes is still more than fine in this meta. White Forest. White Forest has actually been seeing some pretty solid success lately. I know I've been putting it in tier 3 lately. I'm actually a little tempted to put it at the bottom of tier 2, just seeing how well its win rate has been. I'm going to keep it at the top of tier 3 for now. I might end up changing my mind on this later in the video, but regardless, White Forest does still have support that hasn't been released yet. Once that's released, I think it absolutely becomes a tier 2 deck. Hopefully we get that sooner rather than later. But yeah, I think for the time being, like, top of tier 3, bottom of tier 2 is about where I'd put White Forest. I'll leave it here for now, but I might put it back up here later. Tearlaments. Tearlaments actually got a pretty solid buff from the new Gem Knight support. Not only from the support itself, Gem Knight Tearlaments being a pretty decent variant, but 3 Brilliant Fusion is in general not bad for Tearlaments either. Definitely offers them more options in order to make them a little bit more consistent, which I do think is where Tearlament kind of suffers. Usually I kind of rate decks in terms of consistency and power level as separate concepts, but because Tearlament is so focused on the mills, the power level of its board is directly affected by how consistent your build is. And at the end of the day, you just have to rely on RNG more than other decks, which doesn't make Tearlament bad, but it does kind of give it a sort of weakness that all these other decks don't have to quite the same degree. I'm going to put Tearlament in tier 3. I'm going to put it a little bit below White Forest, but I think it's still a very solid deck. Okay, Risal. I can't really talk about this without talking about Malice first. So I was gonna do Malice later when we naturally got to it, but okay, so Malice is obviously gonna be up here, right? I don't think we can question that. I think the real question is Malice actually a tier 0 deck right now, right? Like, is Risal gonna go here, or is Risal gonna go here? Because if Risal goes here, then there's nothing that's gonna be between Malice and Risal. That would make this a tier 0 format. Let me think about this for a moment. So, I'm inclined to say no, we're not in a tier 0 format. I'm inclined to put Risal up here. Now, obviously, Malice is gonna be the vast majority of what you see. Well, it's not necessarily the majority of what you see on ladder if you're defining the majority as over 50%. When I was last looking at Untapped, it said that in Diamond and Master, Malice is being played at a rate of 41.3%, which is fairly comparable to the rate at which Tearlaments was played. Now, there are some people out there who will take that 40% figure and run with it. Much like, you know, in TCG tournaments, I know the kind of arbitrary figure that's used is like, oh, if a deck has more than, what is it, 65% of top cut, then it's tier 0. I think relying on these statistics is, as I already mentioned, very arbitrary, and I'm not a big fan of it. I think there are more things to take into consideration. And even if Malice is being played at rates that are comparable to Tearlaments during tier 0 right now, I still think that Malice is not quite tier 0. I don't think the power gap between Malice and everything else is as vast as the gap between Tearlaments and everything else was, and that is going to be mostly because of Risal kind of acting as that intermediate buffer. If Risal didn't exist, then yeah, I would call Malice a tier 0 deck, but not only does Risal exist and is a good deck in of itself, but Risal is also still kind of affecting the format in terms of how you deck build, right? Like, think about during tier 0 format in terms of like your off-engine like techs. You could go all in on anti-Tearlaments techs, depending on your deck, of course, and generally you'd be pretty safe. But, you know, going all in, like if you were to just go all in on 3 Lancia and 3 Chaos Hunter against Malice, 1, that might not even work thanks to the Ignister support. But 2, you could very easily still just run into Risal, and Risal just does not care about any of this stuff. And while, yes, Malice is 41.3%, the same Untapped page just told me that Risal was at, like, I think 16 and some change percent, which of course is not nearly as much as representing as Malice does, but it's still representing a very, very solid amount of the format, enough that I don't think I can call this tier 0. It's close. This is probably the closest we've been to tier 0 since Tearlaments. I think even, you know, Snake Eye full power format wasn't quite the same level as Malice full power format. So it is close. Again, if it weren't for Risal, I'd be more willing to call Malice tier 0, but I think that Risal actually does still earn a tier 1 slot. If I were willing to do tier 1.5, I guess I'd put Risal there, but I think making 0.5 tiers is like pretty pointless, so yeah, I'm just gonna put it. Momento. Momento remains like the best deck that is just not really played that much, which is kind of another factor, you know, you have to consider when looking at pure statistics for evaluating a format. Like, it's really easy and it's really intuitive even to kind of act like, oh, here are the statistical results for, you know, top 10 rating duels or tournament cuts, so this is completely representative of the format. The answer is actually still no, because of decks like Momento is a great example of that, where like, if everybody knew how to play Momento optimally, then Memento's win rate would be so much higher than it currently is. I would argue it'd probably be even higher than Blue Eyes. I think Momento is a much more flexible and powerful deck when played correctly. But the thing is that Blue Eyes is such an easier deck to play correctly that it's going to get more representation, and as a result, it's going to have a higher win rate. But make no mistake, I think Momento is like easily still a top 5 deck of this format. It's really easy to look at that win rate, but that's also why you can't look at win rate alone, right? You have to factor in more than just the statistics. So anyway, long story short, I think Momento is a tier 2 deck, and I think it's still one of the better decks of the format. Even if you don't see it that much, even if when you do see it, the person's kind of like fumbling, it's just a difficult deck is all that means. All right, let's talk about Gem Knight, one of the archetypes that got a new wave of support here, and I think that Gem Knight is a pretty solid deck. I'm gonna put it in tier 3, and I think that it's not just Gem Knight that's gonna be solid, but also, like I mentioned, some variants like Tearlaments as well. Could debatably put Gem Knights above Tearlaments. I think I actually will. Because Gym Knights have performed pretty well in paper play. We'll have to see if that translates as well on Master Duel. Sometimes it doesn't, but we'll see. Alright, Crystron. Crystron, I'm going to put tier 3. I think I am going to put them lower than Tearlaments, even though I think Crystron is actually a slightly more powerful deck than Tearlaments. The main reason I'm putting them below Tearlaments is because of the same reason, you know, they're not even higher than tier 3 right now, which is pretty much just the hand trap meta, right? I mean, even with the Ignister support, Lancia is still pretty good against Malice, which means it's still going to be played en masse, which means that Crystron is still going to be suffering strays left and right. And especially because Malice is even more prominent this season than it was last season, I'd expect to see more, you know, Lancias, which means, you know, more hate against Crystron. If Lancia wasn't a factor in this meta, I think Crystron would be like middle of tier 2 at the very least. But I mean, yeah, it just really suffers. It really suffers. It catches more strays, I think, than any other deck, you know, in this meta, thanks to the prominence of Lancia. All right, Snake Eye. I still haven't played much Snake Eye. I need to get on that at some point. I'm actually willing to call this a tier 3 deck, and I might even put it above Crystron again, just for, I don't know. It's like, I'm definitely not tier 2. I'll put it a little bit below Crystron. I don't know. It's debatable. I'll put Crystron a little bit above. I think even with the Lancia weakness, it's still got a little bit of an edge above Snake Eye in terms of like consistency. I'll say consistency because I think Snake Eye's issue is more consistency and less power level. Snake Eye is still capable of doing a lot of very scary things, just not quite as often. So yeah, I think that's a fine spot for it. I wouldn't fault you for putting Snake Eye a little bit higher in tier 3, like even up here, or even like, honestly up here. But yeah, we'll put it up here actually. Yeah, I'll do that for now. I think that's fine. Stun is stun is stun is stun. It's still a pretty rogue deck. But I don't know. What is there to say about stun, right? I'm gonna put in rogue and we'll move on. Labyrinth. Labyrinth has kind of been falling off lately, honestly. I haven't been seeing quite as many people on it. I still think it's a really good deck. You know what I might actually do? Because I talked about this earlier. I think I'm going to put White Forest at the bottom of tier 2, and I'll put Lab at the top of tier 3. I think Lab is one of those decks kind of like Memento, where like it just takes a... Well, I don't know. I think it's a little bit more than that. It's just how good is a control deck right now, right? Like, when you think about going against decks like Risal and Malice going second with a control deck, it feels a lot more intimidating than, you know, otherwise. Yeah, I'll leave Lab right here. I think that's fine for now. Voiceless Voice, I think is definitely still a very, very good deck right now. I think it's kind of like on par with White Forest. I'm a little tempted to do this actually. I think that's fine. Yeah, I'll leave it like that for now. I think that's fine. Fiends with control decks are still quite good. I'll even put that a little bit above White Forest. I think that the Bestial / Fiends with control decks really just continue to have modularity as their biggest strength. You know, they can sub in and sub out any number of, not just hand traps, but like engines as well. Like, between Primi and like the weird hero build that I showed off earlier this week. And just even the ratios of like how many Bestial cards you want to play. There's a lot of options for like the Fiendsmith style control decks. I'll put them in tier 2. I think that's a fine spot for them. Remember Atlantean, definitely have not been seeing this deck as much lately. I guess banishing cards from your opponent's hand. Well, you get to pick the one with the bench roll, right? So you don't really run into any danger of banishing a mouse monster by accident. I mean, I don't know. I was kind of saying this when Mermail Atlantean came out and everybody was freaking out of like how disgustingly good the hand reps were. And it's like, I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you're at a point where you're getting hand repped by Molten Glacia, like, it doesn't matter if Molten Glacia is legal or not. Your opponent could still combo out and do other things that would, like, basically effectively win the duel on the spot anyway. That stage of the comboing. Minstrel is annoying, but I don't think, like, ban-worthy or anything. I don't know. I think this is still just like a tier 3 deck. Tenpai, I'll put in tier 2, towards the bottom. Still pretty solid. Mostly Tenpai Sky Striker is what I see. running around on ladder. Mathmech. You know, it's actually kind of funny, so just going back to Tenpai, I'm actually at the point where if I see my opponent lead with Sky Striker cards, I actually just assume it's Tenpai and not even a regular Sky Striker. And the funny thing is, I'm actually right pretty much every single time, so, but, yeah, I think it's still, I'd call it a tier 2 deck. Mathmech. I would love to put this deck higher, but I can't really put it much higher than Rogue. I think it's better than Kashira, though. Like, you would think the Allied Code Talker Adagnister would be this huge burst of support, this huge buff for decks like Mathmech and Adagnister, but it really doesn't change the state of Cyberse decks right now. That's why I'm really not a fan of the Splash Mage ban from the TCG, which of course just means people are going to call for it in Master Duel 2. Cyberse isn't the problem. Now, there's a difference between disliking Cyberse and Cyberse actually being too good. You might dislike Cyberse, but Cyberse as a whole is not a problem to the point that Splash Mage needs to get banned. It's Malice. It's just all Malice. Exodia... I think I'll put that below Kashira. Like, it's still a fine beginner deck, but there's really just not much flexibility. I mean, that's why it's a good beginner deck, right? Because all you do is go search Ankh, activate Ankh, set cards, pass. That's playing Exodia. So. And then Branded... I'll put in tier 2. I'll put it... I'll put it here. Yeah, I think that's fine. Actually, I think I'm gonna bump Tenpai up above these two. And I think that looks good to me. So, there we have it. This is my tier list going into the current meta with the latest selection pack. And as I mentioned before, at the end of the day, I really think that while Malice is, of course, far and away the best deck in the format, it absolutely stands out above everything else, even over Risal. I don't think that we're in a tier 0 format because I think Risal is keeping us from being in that format. So, alright. As always, feel free to let me know what you think in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, but for the meantime, that is going to do it. This is Hexlex. I'm going to be signing out here, but before we do, let's thank our patrons and YouTube members in our outro. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.